Hello everybody, so this is my review on the film Ruby Sparks. I saw the film last night and I've been trying to wrap my head around what my feelings and thoughts are exactly. I've been pondering on stuff, I've made some notes, and I've also tried to separate myself from some of the prejudice and bias and assumptions and whatnot that I walked into the movie with. I did honestly try to sit through it with an open mind. I'm also going to do a separate video. I've realised I have to separate the two. I'm going to discuss the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope, which is something that's going to come into my discussion of Ruby Sparks quite heavily. But I'll do a separate video on that because there's too much to say. I don't want to bog this movie down entirely in that trope and my thoughts on that, so okay. If you don't know, the story is essentially that there's this young 20-something writer named Calvin, and he was really successful in his teens. He had just a random hit novel out of nowhere that became a bestseller, and he's now really known for it, and he was hailed as a young genius and all that kind of thing. But he's not written another book since then, and he's like bogged down in writer's block, and he's rather depressed, and he's very antisocial, and he keeps to himself, and you know, he's quite a forlorn sort of soul. And one night he has a dream about this girl who just comes to him, and he names her Ruby Sparks, and from these dreams he starts writing, and he's able to write that down. But one morning he wakes up and Ruby Sparks is in fact real. She's a three-dimensional human being in his house, and so this creeps him out, understandably, but then he accepts that she's there, and that she is a physical manifestation of his imagination who just happens to be there now, so she can be his girlfriend, and they, you know, embark on a relationship that ends up proving much more messy and difficult than he would have liked it to be, because he thought he had her under his control because he was writing her and all that kind of stuff. The trailer just presented as being a much happier, light romantic comedy, you know, rom-com, rompy sort of feel to it than perhaps the movie has at times, which was refreshing in a way because I was genuinely worried that it was going to be just a perpetuation of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope and that it wouldn't break out of that at all. Fortunately, Zoe Kazan, who plays Ruby Sparks, is also the screenwriter. It's her script. I was curious and worried, mainly because it is a film written by a young woman. And had it been, in the kind of tradition of Cameron Crowe, written by an older male, I would have, I mean, I still would have taken issue with it, but it wouldn't have piqued my interest quite as much, so I was genuinely curious to see what Zoe Kazan had to say about this and how she was going to resolve it in terms of what she'd do with the plot and such. She did craft this narrative out of inspiration from Pygmalion, which is the Greek myth that then inspired George Bernard Shaw to write the play, and then of course that inspired My Fair Lady, and so that's certainly something you get that allusion quite clearly. I did, at least, through the film. I also got the notion of Svengali, which is the music teacher who kind of influenced Gaston Leroux in writing Phantom of the Opera, so like kind of like the puppet master controlling this person, this creature, and I certainly got those influences, and I'm glad that Zoe has acknowledged them, and you know, so I know that wasn't just incidental, that was a purposeful decision, which was nice to know. I think the film got really confused in its tone. So my friend Tim said at the end of it, he felt, personally to him, it was like an essay on the deconstruction of men's ideals of their dream kind of woman, and how, you know, the fantasy that you create in your head is never going to be lived up to in reality, and you need to learn to accept that person as a human being with all their intricacies and stuff, and not, you know, and separate them from that myth you've created for yourself. I actually felt like it tried at times to do that, and there were moments where it was almost succeeding, but ultimately I was actually disappointed because it kept falling into the trappings of just a romantic comedy Hollywood-style structure, and especially the resolution, the ending, really shitted me. So there were moments where I was thinking that it was going somewhere a bit more interesting, and it was making a point, and yes, it wasn't necessarily too subtle at times, but what I think it's worth noting is that, for the most part, especially because of how the trailer was presented, if this film gets an audience at all, especially in this country, I'm going to just go out on a limb and say that most audience members wouldn't be aware of what, wouldn't be consciously aware of what the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope is, and they wouldn't be too attuned to that while they're watching a romantic comedy. They wouldn't care. I suppose maybe they felt they had to gear the film a little more towards, you know, your typical everyday run-of-the-mill audience member. In that respect, I think that was what left me more disappointed at times, because it fell back into a pattern that was really recognisable when it could have gone somewhere a bit more interesting and satisfying for the viewer, at least for me. There's a really clear dichotomy between maybe what Zoe Kazan wanted to do more and the fact that she also still somehow wanted to craft a really sweet love story between Calvin and Ruby that never had any genuine substance to me, but you know, she wanted that to still remain present as well, so kind of juggling two very opposing ideas, really. My other main issue actually was with character, because I'd read several reviews that had said that the protagonist, Calvin, is genuinely unlikable, and I think that's true. And I've said in the past I have nothing against flawed characters. I have nothing against flawed protagonists. I've read other reviewers where they've been criticising Paul Dano's performance, and I actually didn't have a problem with it. I think that everything he did was a conscious choice. I couldn't connect to him and I couldn't care about him. So there were moments where there was meant to be genuine pathos with the guy, and I guess Paul Dano had done such an effective job of making him disdainful to me that I couldn't bridge that gap and feel any pity for him at all. There was something about him that just made me suspect that if certain events had turned out a different way, that Calvin might have ended up being a serial killer. There was something sociopathic about him that could have then ended up going to like a psychopathic arena. I don't know, I was very unsettled with Calvin from the beginning of the film all the way through. It's also difficult to like Calvin even in the midst of him being in the relationship with Ruby. Often what you will see in the Manic Pixie Dream Girl thing is that there'll be this girl will come along and alter the humdrum nature of the male lead's life for the better, and she'll give him inspiration and motivation to change things and to go out and better himself and all that kind of jazz. And in this instance, that's not really the case, which again was a bit of a subversion from the trope. Ruby is there, and all that really happens is that they have a relationship, so he has a relationship now. But it changes absolutely nothing else about the way in which he's living his life. It doesn't change his attitude towards his dog even, and he doesn't treat his dog very nicely, really. He's not appreciative of his dog. That could be seen as serving, like, as, say, a wider metaphor for a lot of the stuff that happens later. Like, you don't see anything about Calvin's life really changing. So at one point Ruby says to him, "You have no friends." And it's true, he has no friends. And he doesn't gain any new friends by Ruby being in his life, and subsequently, because she is so entwined in his life and they're quite codependent on one another, she isn't allowed to have any friends. And when she attempts to have a social life and stuff outside of Calvin, that's when he becomes controlling and tries to ride her the way he wants her and that sort of stuff. She was being sucked into his kind of black hole of nothingness, which was sad to see. And then there was the climactic moment in the film that I recognised while it was taking place that it was meant to be a really disturbing, unsettling moment, but it made me so tense and uncomfortable and upset that I knew that was that. There was no redeeming Calvin for me. Just as, for me personally as a viewer, he'd gone well and truly over into the dark side, and I couldn't forgive him after that. Given that when Zoe Kazan had crafted the script to kind of give you hints at what he was doing and to make it blatantly obvious that he was in the wrong and he was mistreating Ruby and being really selfish and really manipulative and all that kind of stuff, I think the fact that he didn't then end up paying his dues in a way, it just left it, you felt really unsatisfied with it. I did anyway. My friend Sonia, who saw the film with me, turned to me and said, well, at least it just goes to show you that even if a guy can create his ideal perfect woman, he's still never going to be happy. And I thought that was quite amusing. Also, it just goes to show that Calvin as a character is unhappy and unaccepting and unappreciative of everybody and everything. Sort of wanted to kick Calvin in the balls an awful lot. Ruby is a character. With the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, you often don't get to know them as a fleshed out human being. You don't get a vision of this because they are just an idea, and they tend to tick off a lot of boxes that you have, like stereotypical traits that they will have. So she ticked off a lot of those things, but what was nice about it, I guess, at least towards the beginning, was that you knew she was possibly only this way because this is what Calvin imagined her to be. So he created all of this, and so it was imposed upon her. It was refreshing because you know that you didn't get to know the real Ruby because she wasn't the real Ruby. She was Calvin's Ruby. She was the thing that Calvin created. Whilst I would ordinarily be annoyed that once again there was this this flighty, quirky individual with, you know, a bombastic personality and lots of artistic flair and whatnot, and she's turning this guy's life around, but we don't really ever know her because she's evasive and elusive and a mystery. The fact that there is sort of an excuse provided by the storyline was helpful in this way. I ultimately conflicted for a long time as to whether or not Ruby is a real person or his creation, and that of course can be a, you know, a wider reflection on us as an audience watching a film, because are we really meant to care too much about these people anyway, given that they are characters and Ruby is therefore a character of a character? It's meta, man. The supporting characters, I loved that Annette Bening and Antonio Banderas made an appearance, even though they weren't really needed. They, I guess, fitted into the stereotype of hippie parents, but Antonio Banderas' impersonation of a dog was just so adorable, and so they were fun. I had a problem with Calvin's brother, though. He was meant to sort of be, I think, there as the everyman, like the everyday Joe kind of character who talked reason a lot of the time, and at some points he did. He had a great speech right towards the beginning about when Calvin was just writing Ruby. She was still at that point just a written creation, and he said to Calvin, no one will want to read this, you know, you've given this girl quirky traits that are just meant to be fun, and all of her problems are meant to be easily solved and stuff. No woman especially is going to want to read this stuff. And so at the beginning I kind of liked him, but then later on when Calvin and he discover that Calvin can write Ruby to do whatever he wants, and the brother is encouraging him to do this, I was just like, nah. I was disgusted, and I thought, nah, you're a douchebag. No. Performance-wise, I didn't have a problem with anybody's acting, honestly. The ending, there's debate online now as to whether or not it's actually a dream, in that it was yet another one of Calvin's dreams that he was experiencing towards the start of the movie that, you know, prompted him to write Ruby down. Whether or not this was another in the series of those dreams, and it was meant to have shown an evolution in how he saw this girl, and it was meant to have shown a bit of a change in his kind of way of thinking and such. And I actually honestly hadn't considered that, because I'm daft and slow on the uptake. Well, I preferred that idea much more than what happened at the end of the movie actually being real life and actually being something that occurred. I find that much more, you know, potentially hopeful and optimistic, and just a nicer, more balanced way of ending the film, I think, than if he'd really gotten his second chance that easily and readily, and that didn't fly with me at all. If you do see the film, I would like to know your thoughts on the ending and what you think that was meant to mean. I had so much time to ponder it now. I've realised that I don't hate it nearly as much as I thought I was going to. And on a second viewing I might be able to appreciate things and take note of stuff a little more, I'm not sure. I certainly recommend it to people because I would love to know what your opinion is. If you are aware of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope, and if you think it succeeded or failed or just perpetuated something, if it broke new ground perhaps, I'm just wondering. I don't know if I can really give it a rating necessarily. I think for now I will say 3 stars out of 5. I've learned to appreciate some things more than I was last night right after seeing the film, but yeah, still I think a second viewing is needed perhaps in the future for me to see what I think. But I will do a linky video to this, kind of a follow-on continuation of this discussion into the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope and that sort of stuff, so that will hopefully come today, later today or tomorrow or something, so we'll see how we go. But Ruby Sparks, it's out in select cinemas, I think. It's not going to be playing very widely or for very long in Australia, I don't think, and I'm not sure if it's got a very wide release in the US either, so. But if you can see it, do, and we can have a chit-chat about it, so. That's all for now. Goodbye.